Hello, welcome back to my channel. I am super excited for today's video because I'm going to be talking about why I decided to become a nurse practitioner instead of a doctor. If you've been following my channel for a little bit now, you've seen videos that I've posted in the past about nurse practitioner school, being a nurse, working as a nurse, studying as an NP student, and all of that. Never made a video really talking about why I became a nurse instead of going to med school, why I'm becoming a nurse practitioner. I wanted to make this video for a long time, but I didn't make it earlier because last year I actually went through a really serious quarter life crisis where I almost dropped out of nurse practitioner school to go to med school. The reason I didn't share about that is because I have this rule with myself. I don't let myself talk about things online if I'm actively going through something. That's just wisdom across the board to not share something publicly if you're still actively healing through something. But now it's been almost exactly a year since I almost dropped out of school, and I figured, oh, why not go ahead and share it with you all, my lovely people and friends on this channel. So let's get into it. A little overview of what this video is going to look like. I'm first going to give a little disclaimer about my opinion about doctors versus NPs, and then I'll go into some of my background on why I even went into the medical field to begin with. Then I'll talk a little bit about the difference between a nurse practitioner, a doctor, and a PA, explain why I chose to be a nurse practitioner instead of staying as a nurse, and then I will tell you why I almost dropped out last year and where I'm at now with finishing up nurse practitioner school. So just a disclaimer to begin with, I want you guys to know that this is not going to be a video hating on doctors. Obviously, I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for almost 3 years, and I am in nurse practitioner school, so I'm clearly biased towards nursing. I love nursing. I think nurse practitioners are amazing. They are my preferred provider to go see for my own healthcare, but that does not mean that I have anything against doctors and PAs. So let me just completely put that out there. I do not hate doctors. I do not dislike them. I think every healthcare profession is very needed in the role that they are trained for, and I also think that there are flaws in each healthcare profession and that each provider is different. There are good doctors and bad doctors, just like there are good nurse practitioners and bad nurse practitioners. So let's just put it out there. I also have lots of friends and family who are in the medical field. My dad is a doctor himself. He's a retired cardiologist. I've grown up seeing him be a phenomenal physician, so I have nothing against doctors. I have so much respect for you guys. Y'all are amazing. We would not function without you. We are so lucky to have you and to be trained under you and to learn from you and vice versa. But this video is going to be about why I specifically didn't choose to become a doctor. It's not telling you that you shouldn't become a doctor or that there's anything wrong with wanting to become a doctor. Cool? Awesome. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, awkward moments, let's get into some of my background with healthcare. Well, first we're gonna start off with some coffee because I'm still sipping my coffee even though it's like 11 a.m. So a little bit of my background. Dad is a cardiologist, like I mentioned, but he's retired now. So I grew up watching him being a doctor. And for a long time, like because we're so similar, I've always been really interested in his job and interested in what he was doing. And so I naturally was like, oh, maybe I wanna be a doctor. And growing up, I performed super well in school. Type A, straight A student who was obsessed with school. I still love school, even though I'm like really getting in senioritis right now with my master's. And I, for a very long time, since like middle school, high school, and on, wanted to be a doctor. I thought that I wanted to work in either psychiatry, adolescent medicine, something like that, because I was really interested in eating disorders. If you haven't watched my testimony video, I did have an eating disorder myself from about early high school through about mid-college. So as I was going through it and started recovery when I went to college, I did get very interested in the medical side of eating disorders and thought, hey, maybe I want to be a physician who's treating patients with eating disorders. Also, when I went to college, I was very much wanting to study adolescent medicine and work on like an eating disorder unit in a hospital. And so I went to Vanderbilt University for my undergrad degree. I was pre-med. I was a medicine, health, and society major, which is basically just a fancy name for health sciences major. And I took almost all of the pre-med classes. I did bio, I did chemistry, organic chemistry, full send pre-med student. I followed this path pretty seriously halfway through my junior year of college. And at that time, I was also in recovery from my own eating disorder, and I had been treated by both physician's assistants and nurse practitioners for my own care. And I hadn't really been exposed to other providers besides doctors up until that point. I just had seen doctors my whole life and that's all I knew. And so I thought any medical provider is a doctor, which is just completely false. So when I was treated by a PA for the majority of my eating disorder treatment and then transitioned to seeing an NP for my primary care and also women's health care, my mind was just completely open to all the possibilities within healthcare. I was like, oh my goodness, I love these providers. They're so personable. I feel like they're taking care of my whole self and not just what's going on with me medically. They were really invested in me and my life, and it was really special to get that kind of treatment. So I really credit those encounters with PAs and NPs in college for just sparking my interest in other healthcare provider roles. And so I'm mid-college, I'm going through this intensive eating disorder treatment. I am totally burnt out and really struggling to juggle all of my classes, to actually go to my dietitian and therapy appointments, sometimes once, twice, 3 times a week. I was doing pretty intensive therapy while a full-time student at Vanderbilt. And I just had a lot of growth moments in therapy and also with the student ministry I was involved in and just friends at the time and mentor figures, really getting to the bottom of why I wanted to pursue medicine. And I realized that for me, it was not for the right reasons. I wanted to be a doctor because I thought it was the best thing that you could do. I thought that's what the smartest people do, right? They become doctors, they become lawyers. I thought that if you were super intelligent and performed well in school, you ought to go pursue something like medicine. And I was still very interested in healthcare, and I wanted to learn about the body and how to treat it and how to help people live fuller, healthier lives. But I was killing myself in my classes. I was doing very well. I wasn't sleeping. I was staying up until 4 in the morning studying for organic chemistry tests, and I hated it. I was miserable. It was contributing to the worsening of my eating disorder and keeping me from pursuing full recovery because all I could think about and all I was obsessed over was school. It just wasn't healthy for me. So as I really got real with myself in college, I had to decide that recovery from my eating disorder was going to be more important to me than pursuing a career in medicine. And that's not to say that you can't do both. I'm sure there are many people out there who have recovered from really difficult mental health challenges while pursuing a medical education, and that is amazing. I just know for me, I wasn't able to be my full self and sleep well and exercise and eat and just take care of myself in the way that I needed to at that time and also throughout the rest of my life while kicking myself to pursue a career in medicine. So something I struggle with is this idea of, if you're able to do something, should you do something? Dustin and I talk about this a lot, this whole idea of like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. I'm gonna say that again because that phrase has literally changed my life. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I take that to mean just because you are incredibly smart, incredibly gifted, and could be a doctor, could be a lawyer, could do these things, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And this is a very simple phrase, and I think it takes a lot of discernment and prayer, a lot of self-reflection as well to figure out what that means for you, because sometimes God very specifically calls people to be doctors. I'm not saying to ignore your gifting or your talents or blessings that the Lord has given you and just do something that's easy because it doesn't take that much effort. What I'm saying is that just because you could do something, just because you have the capacity to push yourself to your limits and go after the hardest thing or the most challenging thing, it doesn't mean that you have to. And this is again where it takes that discernment to figure out what is the Lord calling me to versus what am I just pushing myself to my absolute limits and sacrificing other areas of my life and of my well-being. And for me, that was the case. I knew that I could be a doctor. I knew I could get into med school and I could succeed and I could be a very successful physician. At the same time, I knew myself well enough, knew that pursuing this medical education, at least at that time in my life, was going to completely compromise my health, my relationships, my spiritual life, my just social well-being in general. I knew it wasn't worth it to me. And honestly, it was one of the best decisions I ever made for my health. I know there are probably a lot of you out there who are very similar to me and being very high achieving, very successful, very high capacity individuals. And that is such a gift. It means we're able to do a lot and take on a lot of responsibility and emotional weight and just have that mental capacity to do great things for the glory of God and for His kingdom. I also don't think that the Lord calls us to be completely exhausted, burnt out, miserable while pursuing the things that He's called us to. I'm not saying that we need to pursue something that's just cushy and comfortable and all of that. Like, no, we are promised suffering in this life and we are called to hard things, but I don't think that we necessarily have to force ourselves to do this horrible thing. And that gets into a lot of different theology. I know everyone has different thoughts on suffering and all of that, so we're not going to get into that because I honestly don't feel equipped to have that kind of conversation, but talk to your pastors about that, trusted friends, people in divinity school, all the things. That is just my take on this topic, and that was a helpful guiding principle for me and something that I discovered in prayer and reflection and discernment and community, that I was pursuing this hard thing for the wrong reasons. It wasn't because I felt like God was calling me to be a doctor. It was because I told myself that this is what I need to do to be the best, to have this prestige, to be elite, to be seen as someone who is smart. And that does not sound like the Holy Spirit to me at all. So I'm gonna pause there and talk to you guys a little bit about the difference between doctors, nurse practitioners, and PAs before I get into why I decided to change course from doctor to nurse practitioner. So let's get a sip of our coffee. Okay, so brief overview. Again, I am in nurse practitioner school. I have never been a doctor or a PA. I've been a nurse, so this is not going to be a fully comprehensive discussion of the differences between these professions. But the basics of what you need to know is we've got doctors, nurse practitioners, and PAs, medical providers who can diagnose, prescribe drugs, treat, refer, do all of the components of treating a patient with some sort of illness, with some sort of healthcare problem. Doctors are probably what you're most familiar with. You've got your MDs and your DOs. Different type of training, but very similar in what they're able to do professionally. They go through medical training, which is about 4 years long, and then they go through a residency program, which can be anywhere from 1 to 7, 8 years if you're a surgeon, to get very specialized training in, say, gynecology, anesthesia, internal medicine, radiology, things that are very specific. And you have PAs, physician assistants. I think they're going through a process right now to start being called physician associates. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's happening right now in the PA world. They're trained very similarly to physicians under a medical model that is disease focused. So physicians and PAs are trained to find diseases, to diagnose them, and to treat them. This medical model is very focused on pathology and not so much on wellness and preventative care and all of that. And so providers trained from this medical model are experts at pathology, experts in pathophysiology, in pharmacology, in anatomy, physiology. If you have a disease that is going on with your body, with your brain, these are the people who are experts at this because they have spent so much time doing in-depth training in everything that can go wrong in the body, how to treat it with medicine. You have PAs who their training is much shorter than doctors. They do have a residency that they can do. I think it's more optional, but they usually come into PA school with a certain number of hours of clinical training. I can't remember if it's like shadowing hours versus direct clinical experience, but I know people who have become nurses before becoming PAs, who have been EMTs, who have been medical assistants. There's lots of different avenues of experience you can get before going to PA school. And so these people will come into PA school with like a year or so of full-time experience, if not more, and they go through about 2 or so years of training. It's usually a didactic year where you're doing classes for a year and then a clinical year. And after that, they'll sometimes pursue that specific training in a certain specialty as a PA residency after they finish PA school. And once they are out there as providers, they function under the guidance of medical doctors. So they have to have an agreement with a physician who is overseeing what they're doing, what they're prescribing, treating, diagnosing, all of the things. And as far as I know, in every single state in the US, that is how PAs have to practice, and they do not have independent practice. Now that's a big difference between PAs and nurse practitioners. So kind of switching gears, we've got the nursing world. Obviously, I'm very biased. I love nurses. I love being a nurse. I love nurse practitioners. They're my favorite providers to work with and to see for my own care. So the nursing model of care is very patient-centered, very person-centered. So we look at the person in front of us who happens to be our patient in that relationship, and we look at them from a physical perspective, mental, emotional, psychosocial, spiritual, socioeconomic perspective, all the different things that impact their world and impact their health, their ability to take care of themselves, their ability to afford care, to even have transportation to get to care, trauma background, all of these things that influence health of that person sitting in front of you. This is what we call the nursing model of care. So we have the medical model and the nursing model. Again, things are changing to where these are kind of becoming more one and the same. I know that med schools and PA schools are genuinely trying to become more holistic, which I think is wonderful. But traditionally, nursing does have a very different model from the medical model. So nurse practitioners. Nurse practitioners have to become nurses before they can be NPs. They don't always have to have work experience, but it's usually recommended for NPs to have some experience working as a registered nurse before becoming an NP. I worked for about 8 months before I went back to NP school, so I kind of did that, kind of not. I'm obviously very pro work experience. I think it's great. I don't think it's necessary, however. I think it really depends on the person, depends on their personal background, work experience, educational background, and also what specialty they're going into specifically. So my background is in women's oncology, postpartum, labor and delivery, antepartum, all women's health experience, only with female patients, and I'm studying to become a women's health nurse practitioner. And so what that means is that I function very similarly to an OBGYN, but I will not be delivering babies. I'm just doing clinic work, seeing patients for regular gynecology, abnormal gynecology, prenatal visits, all the things. I can do pretty much everything that gynecologists can do, but no surgery. I can do simple procedures in the clinic like IUD insertions and removals, neck nexplanon insertions and removals, endometrial biopsies, colposcopies if I get extra training, things like that. Another really cool difference between nurse practitioners and PAs is that nurse practitioners, and I think 22, 23 states in the US right now, are able to practice independently from physicians. So this is a very hot topic in the nursing world right now. We've got a lot of boards of nursing of different states advocating for nurse practitioners to be able to legally practice independently from physicians. There's lots of different opinions about this. Generally, The medical side doesn't love this idea, and generally the nursing side does love this idea. What I've seen in some states that I find really interesting is that certain states, like I believe Virginia and also I think Nebraska, I read a paper on this last semester, so I'm trying to jog my memory, but certain states will have requirements for nurse practitioners to get a certain number of hours of experience supervised by a physician before earning that independent practice. This is honestly my preferred model. I think that's a great middle ground between the two, where we have required education and supervision for these early new grad nurse practitioners, to have physician oversight, to have people mentoring them and guiding them to become a fully independent nurse practitioner. You're kind of earning your way towards that. Okay, so sorry y'all, my camera just died. We're gonna switch to iPhone footage, so it's probably gonna look pretty different, but anyways, just hang with me for a second. I'm obviously very in support of fully independent practice for nurse practitioners, with the caveat of requiring some sort of supervised training for a certain number of years or of clinical hours before that nurse practitioner can become fully independent. And with this independence, this actually allows nurse practitioners to potentially open their own practice, to work in collaborative practice settings with other nurse practitioners, PAs, MDs, without having to have that required supervision from doctors. Kind of a problem with this supervision is that medical doctors are trained very differently from practitioners, and so requiring this career-long supervision doesn't really make a lot of sense, especially when the nurse practitioner has had so many years of experience and is trained very differently from the physician. And we also know based on research that outcomes for nurse practitioners, even when practicing fully independent, are the same, if not better, than that of their physician counterparts. Their clinical outcomes, patient satisfaction, safety ratings, all of these things. And so the evidence really shows that nurse practitioners are very competent, very safe, excellent providers that patients are very satisfied with. It's just this pushback from physician counterparts when it comes to financial reimbursement and insurance reimbursement and all of these things, and just competition, honestly, and I think some ego in the field that's keeping these laws from getting passed to allow nurse practitioners to practice independently. So if you have any more questions about that, again, wrote a whole policy paper on it. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm very in support of fully independent practice for nurse practitioners, with some caveats that I think are just wise in place for our new grad nurse practitioners starting their profession. So anyways, we'll pause there and we'll go ahead and start a poppy pause before I get into why I almost dropped out of NP school, which is probably why you clicked on this video. So yeah, all right. Poppy pause. I've got a strawberry lemon flavor. Strawberry lemon. What are we going to poppy pause about today? I really like doing these poppy pauses. It's like a fun little lighthearted break in our sit-down chats that are usually more serious than in the vlogs. What's on my mind is I'm about to go do my first dress fitting in a couple hours. Can't talk about the dress because Justin's gonna watch this video and he doesn't know anything about the dress, and we're gonna keep it that way until the day of the wedding. So yeah, I can't talk about that. Let's talk about travel. So my friend Caitlin, shout out to Caitlin, and I chatted on the phone yesterday, and we have been wanting to go to France together for a very long time. We've been friends for over 4 years now. So in nurse practitioner school, she also graduates in May like I do, and we have wanted to go on a grad trip to France together, and we're trying to figure out like when to go, the best time of year, like best way to do it so it's not super expensive. And we were planning originally to go when the Paris Olympics are going on in July, August, but we feel like that might not be the safest thing, just with all the people there and all of the media, and just, you know, it feels like kind of a recipe for crime and like terrorist attacks too, so don't want to be there for that. We're thinking of going like right after the Olympics, sometime in August. So if you have been to France in August, and if you have any tips for finding good flight deals, Airbnbs versus hotels, food, transportation, all the things, let us know. We've both been to France before, both been to Paris, which is where we would go stay for the first bit. Super pumped. It'll definitely be weird not being with Justin for like a week, but we agreed that that seems like a reasonable amount of time. Anything more than a week just feels kind of weird to be gone from your like newly wedded husband. So yeah, if you have thoughts or tips for Paris in the summertime, let us know. I'm super excited. I definitely spent like 30 minutes after class today looking up flights, which that's like story of my life. I'm planning for things that are so far away when I could be doing wedding stuff, probably should be doing wedding stuff. So yeah, if you're a planner and you love like looking at travel stuff for a year or so in advance when you don't need to, let me know. It's like deeply comforting to me to plan for trips that might not actually happen, but this one will happen. We're gonna make it happen. We're gonna go to France. Oui, oui, au revoir, merci, bonjour. Okay, poppy on pause. Okay guys, welcome back. So last part of this video is going to be telling you why I almost dropped out of nurse practitioner school to go to med school. So backtrack a little bit, I have been in NP school at Georgetown University for almost 2 years now. I went from Vanderbilt, got my BSN, which is just a basic nursing degree at Duke University, and started at Georgetown in their online nurse practitioner program in January of 2022. So we're almost hit 2 years, which is just absolutely crazy to me. I'm in the Women's Health NP program. I started out in the Women's Health and Midwifery program, like WHNP and CNM, which means Certified Nurse Midwife. I actually transitioned from that to the single track Women's Health NP program this summer because I had this big life realization that I didn't actually want to catch babies and all of that. You can look at that video below where I talk about leaving labor and delivery, leaving midwifery, transitioning to just Women's Health NP, all the things. So anyways, I am doing that program. I'm set to graduate in May because I took a didactic semester, which means just classes this fall to have more time for wedding stuff, life transition, also to find a new clinical placement for the spring, which I'm still working on. But anyways, last year I was still in my didactic year. So the first year of our program is just classes. It's all foundational classes like patho, pharmacology, biostatistics, a research class, health assessment, all the things. And last October, I was working as a labor and delivery nurse full-time in school, which was technically part-time, but it was full-time load of work. So I was working like 60, 70-hour weeks just between class preparation, actual class, my labor and delivery job. I was working rotating day and night shifts, and honestly, it was awful. It was super stressful. I was incredibly burnt out. When I was working labor and delivery, I loved surgery. I loved being in the OR. I thought C-sections were fascinating. And I was just very frustrated with my classes at the time. So both of these things are going on. I'm getting exposed to these OBGYNs at work, and I'm also getting really frustrated with my coursework. And what was happening at the time was I didn't feel necessarily challenged in my schoolwork. So it was very hard. It was a lot of information and there was a lot to keep up with, but we weren't learning a lot of women's health. Our health assessment course was for all students, so any student in any specialty. It wasn't just women's health. So I was learning stuff about things I just won't be doing in clinical practice as a women's health provider. And I was just so frustrated. I had in this class for so long. I hadn't learned like specific women's health stuff, which I was going to get to in just a couple months. And I was feeling very frustrated by how little I felt I knew. That's the big thing. I felt like I wasn't getting the time to actually learn things super in depth. And I looked at my physician counterparts at work and I was like, they know so much. What if I get out of this program and I don't know anything and I feel unprepared and stupid and like I didn't put in the time to actually learn this stuff? And that is one thing I will say that I do find frustrating about nurse practitioner education is most everyone has to work full time just to like afford rent and all these things while being in school. You don't have the luxury to have like these 4 years where you're just focused on this education. And it would be really nice, honestly. Like right now I'm not working, which has been such a blessing while I'm in school, but to be able to have these 4 years to like deep dive learn medicine was honestly like really appealing to me at the time. And I was very jealous of my physician counterparts who had this time to like in depth learn this stuff where I felt like I was just force feeding it and rushing through it and just not even learning the stuff I wanted to learn. And so I had this freak out in October of last year. I was in Dallas, Texas for my cousin Catherine's bridal shower. Shout out to Catherine. And I started crying with my parents in the hotel and I was like, I think I want to drop out. I think I'm going to go become a doctor. I feel like I'm rushing through school and I'm not learning anything. I'm not learning what I want to learn. I want to specialize just in women's health, like all this stuff. And it freaked them out a little bit. If they're watching this, they will know. They're like, oh my goodness. First of all, med school is so expensive. You would go into so much debt doing that after spending all this money on nursing school and nurse practitioner school. It would be such a big path change. I would have to drop out, take more pre-med classes, apply, take the MCAT, all these things. It would be years before I could even go to med school. And then years before even practicing as an attending because I'd have to go through OBGYN residency, all of these things. And I'd be like 35 before I could practice, which is not a big deal. I know a lot of people do that. But for me, wanting to like get married and start a family, I'm putting that all on hold for a while. And so that weekend, I was kind of a mess and I decided I was going to take until the end of that year. So like mid-October to December 31st, 2022, which if you've seen my other videos, you know what happened on that day. I decided for myself, like, hey God, you gotta tell me if I'm doing this med school thing or not, because I'm really frustrated with NP school and here's my deadline, it's New Year's Eve. So the thing there is that I met my now fiance on that day, and that was quite helpful in making that decision. I did make the decision to not drop out of school before I met Justin on New Year's Eve, but it was funny timing to tell God this thing and then meet my husband on the day that I was like, I'm dropping everything, I'm dropping out of school. So I honestly credit my decision to actually stay put in nurse practitioner school to this Spain trip that I took. So I know people talk about going to Europe and like figuring out your life and all this stuff, but I kid you not, just getting out of your normal environment and doing something different and realizing, oh my gosh, life doesn't revolve around labor and delivery nursing and being an OBGYN and just healthcare in general. It was so refreshing and reminded me of the other areas of my life that I care about, the other things I want to do with my life, travel, relationships, marriage, family, all of these things. And I was like, okay, Emily, first of all, we're working way too much. We are kicking ourselves. We are spending too much time on school and too much time on work. We are doing too much at once. We need to let something go and actually prioritize rest. And that has totally changed my life. I'll make a separate video with Justin pretty soon here about Sabbath. But coming back from that Spain trip and realizing how burnt out and tired I was and how miserable my life was, I was like, we don't want to live our life like this. Like if we go to med school, it's going to be even worse than this. If we do residency, it's going to be worse. My mental health wasn't great last fall. So many things were going on behind the scenes. And I really decided to prioritize from that point forward rest and rhythms and people and other areas of my life besides school and work. And in that discernment process and in prioritizing those things, I realized nurse practitioner school is still what I need to do. And I need to just hold on a little bit longer until I get to the specialty courses, which happened in January of this year. Started my women's health courses, loved them. Thank God. I trust that the Lord has called me to be a nurse practitioner, and that even though I feel like I'm not learning things, even if I feel like I'm stupid and not absorbing the material, that was just not true. I was performing so well in school. I am learning things, but I am a novice. I'm a student. I'm not going to know everything. And so comparing myself to a doctor who's had so much more training than I have when I'm 26 and they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, of course they know more than me, and I will get there at some point. I will learn that knowledge throughout my career. And so it was just a very humbling, gentle moment with myself of realizing, okay, I don't have to know everything right now. I just need to know enough to be a safe, competent, basic level provider as a women's health NP and pass boards and do my best, and I will become a phenomenal provider, but I'm not going to be like that right off the bat. And so that is what ultimately helped me realize that I wanted to stay in NP school. Another side of this was also thinking about work-life balance, realizing that I did really want to get married and become a mom and prioritize my family and probably honestly work part-time most of the time while my kids are young. And that's something that I would still love to be able to do, is to kind of have a balance of being a working mom and being a stay-at-home mom. That would be really ideal for me personally. And being a nurse practitioner allows a lot more flexibility with that. So that is why I made that decision. This is probably going to be a long video. We'll see. I gotta go edit it now. But I hope that was helpful to you if you were also in a similar situation, or you're making career decisions or deciding what healthcare profession to go into. Let's see. Secret emoji is going to be a stethoscope. Yeah. Cool. I hope that was fun. Comment below. I haven't decided Friday's video. It's either going to be a vlog from my Houston trip that I'm on right now, or the video about what I've learned from engagement, because I polled on my Instagram stories what video y'all wanted to see. Put my Instagram somewhere here, so if you're not following me, you can go do that. I'm starting to do more reels and fun stuff like that, so go follow me there and I'll ask you what videos you want to see. Okay, I hope you have a great day. I'm about to go see my wedding dress, which I will not let you guys see until after the wedding, but I am gonna film some behind the scenes footage for a behind the scenes wedding video that's gonna come out in January. Okay, love y'all, have a good day.